Yisikna Eved Ivri. If you purchase a Jewish slave, but it doesn't say Eved Yisraeli, Eved Ivri, a Hebrew slave. Sheish Shonim Yavod Vashvius Yetzi L'Chovshi Chinom. For 6 years he works. In the 7th year, he goes out Chinom without payment. He doesn't have to compensate, meaning whatever the agreement, he sells himself. We'll see. A person can become a Jewish slave one or two ways. Either he steals, and he's not able to compensate the person he victimizes. So they sell him into slavery for his value, and with that value, they pay the one who was victimized for the value of the theft. Meaning, if the object that he stole exists, all you do is you return the stolen object. But the Torah says if the object doesn't exist any longer, the Torah says you have to pay its value. And if the person doesn't have its value, it's not like a debt. Person borrows money and then he doesn't have the money to pay. So he's a debtor. You can garnish his wages, you go after his assets, and in the future he has to pay. But if a person steals and he's not able to pay to compensate the victim for what he stole, and it's the situation because the item that he stole no longer exists, so then you sell him into slavery for the value of the item. Now, it's very interesting. There's another situation. A person sells himself as an indentured servant. Person has financial issues, can't support his family, he has debts to pay, so he sells himself into slavery. That's called mocher atzmo. He's not being sold because he stole, but rather it's his decision. He wants to sell himself, and he figures for the value of him selling himself, he'll have that money, whatever he does with that money. That's called mocher atzmo. Also, Torah says maximum you can only sell yourself for 6 years. The 7th year you go free. The other case is speaking, you stole. The item doesn't exist. You have to compensate the person you victimized. But here there's a chiddush. When you sold for something you stole, the value of the person, if it's more than the value of the theft, or it's less, you cannot sell that person. For the value to repay, to compensate the victim, meaning it's almost impossible ever to sell a person into slavery to pay for a theft, because the number has to be exactly. If let's say the item is worth 20,000, and selling him into slavery is worth 10,000, you don't sell him, because even if you sell him, you're not going to be able to reimburse or compensate the victim for what he stole, because it's less. And we don't say, well, you sell him twice. We don't say that. It's only the sale of the person has to be the equivalent of the theft. What about if he's worth more? And you say, well, you'll keep the balance. The slave will keep the balance. No, if he's worth more than the item, you can't sell him either. He has to be worth exactly the amount of the theft. And if he's worth exactly sold, otherwise you're not able to sell him. So how often were you able to sell a slave due to stealing? It was almost very rare that it ever happened. But a case of where a person sells himself as an indentured servant for the value of his service, for whatever the 6 years is worth, that's up to him, whatever he's agreeable to sell himself for, that's the price he's going to receive. But maximally, he's only a slave for 6 years, not beyond that. The 7th year, he must go out free. Okay, now, if you notice, the Torah refers to him as Eved Ivri. He's referred to as a Hebrew slave, not Eved Yisraeli or Eved Yisrael. He's not called Eved Yisrael. So Rabbeinu Bachya explains the person who actually sells himself into slavery, whether it's because he stole or because he chose to sell himself, it's because of something which is wrong. The Torah says, what happens if he stays beyond the 6 years? And he says after 6 years, he goes to the Beis Din, and he says, I don't want to be sold. I don't want to be emancipated. Because we'll see that during this 6 year period, the master has a right to give him a Canaanite woman to bear children for him, the master. And he says after 6 years, Ohavti es ishti, Ohavti es adoni es ishti es bonai. I love my master, I love my wife, I love my children. Even though she's a Canaanite woman, it's not really his wife. It's only a woman that he's bearing children with. But he says after 6 years, Ohavti es adoni, I love my master. I love my wife, I love my children. The children not his either. The children do not identify with him. Biologically, they're his, but legally, halachically, they're not his children. But he says that. So the Torah says they put the all through his ear, and then he's a slave until Yovel, until the Jubilee year. That's the halacha. Now, why do they put the hole through his ear, through the cartilage of his ear, his right ear? So the Gemara says in Kedushin, Rashi cites it. Here the Torah says you're not permitted to steal. And he went and stole. So the ear that heard at Sinai that you're not permitted to steal, he was oblivious to that, and he stole. Therefore, he has a defective hearing mechanism. Hearing doesn't mean literally hearing the words, meaning to be able to value what you heard. As a result of that, they put the hole through the cartilage of his right ear. Or what about if he sold himself into slavery? He didn't steal. Since it says in the Torah, Avodahem, the Jews are my servants, which in inference is lo avodim v'avodim, and you should not be subjects of servants, because if you're the servants of Hashem, it's considered something negative. It's something which is a breach of respect for God, selling yourself. Therefore, you get the martzeya, you get the all through the ear, the right ear. So here it says, Ozen Shishom b'Sinai, the ear that heard at Sinai. Avodehem v'lavodim lavodim. Or the ear that heard at Sinai, you're not permitted to steal, and he did steal. So this person, in terms of his behavior, he behaves like a pre-Sinai Jew. What was the classification of Jews pre-Sinai? What were we called? We were called Ivrim. We were not called Yisrael. The appellation of Yisrael that we called Bnei Yisrael, that came about as a Jewish people that was post-Sinai. After we became Hashem's people, we received the Torah. So therefore, the one is Kisikna Eved Ivri. When you buy that Hebrew slave, he's referred to Eved, not Eved Yisrael, but Eved Ivri, because due to his behavior, what's the persona that he's displaying? He's displaying the persona of a pre-Sinai Jew, not a post-Sinai Jew. Therefore, the Torah refers to him as Ivri rather than Eved Yisrael. This is the Rabbeinu Bachir, as he explains the pasuk. The question is, we find that if the Jewish slave says to the Bezdin, after 6 years when he's meant to be emancipated, I don't want to go out, because Ahavti es Adoni. I love, because the master gave a Canaanite woman to bear children. She's not his wife, the children halachically are not his children. But he says, I love my master, I love my wife, I love my children. Lo eitzei chofshi, I don't want to go out free, I want to remain. So then it says, Ikishu adon el adeles, el bezuzo, rotza es, I was not about to say, they put the all through his ear, the cartilage in the right ear, avodo lolam, he's a slave lolam forever. And olam means olam shel yovel. Whenever yovel happens, that's when he's emancipated, he's freed. He can't stay long with that no matter what. So the question is, it should say avodo ara yovel. What's say lolam? So the way I understood it in the past, the Ramchal writes in the Derech Hashem, we find that Shabbos is every 7th day, 6 days chol, ordinary. 6 years you do your work, 6 days. You're involved in the mundane, creative activity in the mundane. And Shabbos is Lashem Elokecha. Shabbos, the 7th day, you designate purely for Hashem, Lashem Elokecha. Even Ochel Nefesh is not permitted. Even food-related activities, which is permitted on Yom Tiv, on Shabbos is not permitted. It's designated Lashem Elokecha. So Ramchal explains that in regard to the spirituality of a Jew, his neshama, if you're involved in the mundane beyond a certain point, you actually affect the equilibrium of your spirituality. Shabbos is made on the Mabor. Shabbos itself has a semblance of world to come. It's literally It's a spiritualization of your neshama, of your spirituality. Therefore, when the seventh day comes, you're entering into a spiritual chamber to be fully infused with this level of spirituality, which is like from another existence. It has a semblance of the world to come. You have a relation with Hashem, and being touched, you have the vibrancy that to go through another day, another week of what? Of the mundane. So every 6 days, you have to be reinfused with this spiritual sustenance to be able to maintain your balance of spirituality. Otherwise, your spirituality becomes deficient to the point where it could be of no return. It cannot be compensated unless you do tshuva, whatever it may be. 6 years, you work the field. 7th year, the lamp remains fallow. Again, 6 years, you're involved in the mundane. Day in and day out. Besides Shabbos, you're not permitted to work. The 7th year, it's fallow. And it says, Lashem Elokecho. So if you look in the Sephardim in Parshas Bahar, what's Lashem Elokecho? You have to take out a year for introspection and for Avodas Hashem and Tefillah and learning. A year, it's like what we call the sabbatical. Take a year off to be fully immersed in what? In spirituality. Tefillah, Avodah, and the study of Torah. It's a re-spiritualization. So it comes out, the Torah says a slave, because the question is, if he violated the law of you're my servants and you're not servants of servants. You heard at Sinai, you're not permitted to steal. And so he should receive the all in through his ear immediately when he's sold for stealing or when he sells himself into slavery. Why only after 6 years when he says, I love my master, I love my wife, I love my child, only then does he get it through the ear? Which indicates this defect. He has a defect. And that hole in the ear remains permanently with him. It's interesting, a Kohen cannot be sold as an Eved Ivri. Why? Because what happens, the Torah tells us that it says, when the Jubilee year comes, it says, V'shav le'mishpachto. He returns to his family. A Kohen, if you put the hole through his ear, the cartilage, he becomes a Balmum. He's considered blemished. A Kohen that's a Balmum cannot do the Avodah. He's disqualified from doing the Avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. As a result of that, the only slave that can be sold for 6 years, it's only if he could stay till the Jubilee year. He has that option that he could say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, and he could stay till the Jubilee. Then he's able to return to his family. A Kohen, if he returns after the 6th year, meaning he stays for the Jubilee year, he cannot go back to his family. He goes back as a defective Kohen. As a result of that, you're not even able to sell him initially. A regular Jew having a hole in your ear, you're called a defective person in terms of physical defect. As a result of that, since you could be Shavli Mishpachto, a Kohen or a Levi can be sold as an Eved Ivri. Kohen cannot be sold as an Eved Ivri for that reason. But it's Avodah. Once you go beyond 6 years and you behaved and you were in a setting of servitude more than 6 years, it becomes a permanent defect, means spiritual defect. Therefore, it's Avodah L'Olam. Even though you're going to go out with the Yovel, nevertheless, since you went beyond the 6 year limit, you went beyond that, you went and infringed on the 7th, which is the re-spiritualization of the Jew to be the free man, and you forfeited, you gave that up and allowed yourself to be a slave. As a result of that, that defect or blemish remains with you forever, even though you're going to be emancipated 6 months later or a year later. It doesn't make a difference.